I like Peter, but I must say I always find it intensely irritating to hear him speak. Because I disagree with almost everything he says, and I find much of it incoherent and contradictory. That was a fascinating account of the problems we face as described the issues of global warming, peak oil, the need to use less energy, the need to cut down, the impossibility of continuing rapid growth. What Peter said on all those things was very interesting. He said nothing. I don't want to get too far distracted onto answering Peter, but I think his whole line about planning for reality is really a bully's line. It says we and the plutocracy basically are going to give you this kind of growth, get used to it and accept it. It's known as realistic or positive planning, but planning doesn't solve most of these environmental problems. And it's largely a circular argument. The things Peter thinks we need, like more labour force and so on, we only need if we're to have the growth that he insists we must have. I'll talk later about why growth economists, and that's what Peter's first degree is, believe in that, and how hard indeed it is to get off the whole assumption that the economy must grow. Governments are terribly afraid of the downside of the business cycle, and so are businesses with very good reasons. But we are striking limits, as Ross Garneau has been pointing out, and we do need to start thinking. And I think it's got to go a long way beyond the notion that we need more people in the country in order to build stuff so that we can use less energy per person. I don't think that works. I think that's like collecting more gasoline to put out fires. And then a little later we heard that we needed more mining. Well, do you know what mining involves? It's not done by solar power, I can assure you. It's done by using vast amounts of fossil fuel energy to move huge amounts of rocks, crush it, and push it through very energy expensive processes. There's absolutely no way you're going to reduce energy by following Peter's path.
But you forgot the dynamite.
If you had dynamite, that too is produced from fossil fuel. As for bringing in workers to build houses, that strikes me as a little odd. On Pacific Islanders needing more land and being our fault, as yet I think the Pacific has risen less than 1 centimetre. People in Tuvalu are in great trouble with land and water for a very simple reason. They've tripled their population. It is population pressure as yet, not rising sea levels that are the problem. And the whole argument about being short of labour, if you come from one of those country towns where the local rag is really just a developer's propaganda sheet, you know that 1 week the whole story is we're terribly short of workers. We can't get workers for our projects. The next week is we desperately need more projects to employ our workers, and it reverses one way and the other week after week. More people, more projects, government must bring in more projects, build absurdities like the Canberra airport development, and then you'll need more people for them, and then you'll need more developments from more people. It goes around in that circle. The underlying assumption is growth. Anyway, let me not get me distracted further. Peter might well find my views equally unpleasant. Let's look at the items I've prepared for you. Right, the first one. Yeah, that's just a basic running sheet.
This one?
Yeah, could I have that running sheet because I can't actually see with these glasses much. So what do we want to do now? There's a very basic piece of demography. For about the last 1 million years, human growth. And you can see what any biologist would recognise as a species with high weed potential. began very small, were kept very small for a very long time, and now we have shot off into this kind of exponential growth. That's why the planet is in such trouble, why the climate and all other systems are reeling under it. But even that graph doesn't tell you quite how bad it is. It shows you only the demography, the way in which human numbers have increased. But at the same time, human per capita demands have increased almost equally. And can we have the one just after that first? The other way up. This, I think, could win a prize for the roughest graph you've ever seen. It was done about 5 minutes ago. It's a mental sketch map in which is a very simple graph. The y-axis going up indicates time for about 200,000 years ago. The heavily coloured area is the area occupied by the genus Homo, and the width of it basically expresses, the resources that are available on the planet. As you notice, if you ignore the writing that I had to fit in down below, in the lower part, almost all of it is white space, space occupied by all the planet's other species. And the genus Homo goes through a very dangerous bottleneck down at the bottom, where all species of the genus Homo went extinct except one, which survived. As you know, we all carry the genes of one woman who lived back around there. She may have been the only woman existing at the time, but we weren't very close, one may suspect, to extinction. So have a bit of fellow feeling for endangered species. We were one once. We got through, and then, much as in the other graph, you see the enormous expansion as humans start to take over more and more. So the darkened area starts to be almost the whole world. The projections are that will go on through about another 50% increase in the human population. At around 2050, roughly where that graph ends, in just of ambiguity, we'll have about 9 to 10 billion on the globe. And all other species will be pushed, as you can see, into that tiny bit of white space. But unfortunately, it gets worse, because when we hit maximum human population, we won't yet have maximum affluence. The poorer people among those will still be aiming for whatever level of affluence the West currently has or has still come back to. So it will produce further and further pressure. In fact, a lot of the projections show it going right off to the left through the chart. In other words, we will need more than one Earth just for the humans alone. The possibilities for other species obviously are not very attractive in that scenario. But to understand why economists think so differently, here we have, if we go back to the previous, we have an equally rather rough sketch map of how economists see things. The assumption is you must be growing, you must be on an upward slope. That's actually a real graph, not a notional one, showing the increase in GDP in Australia, which is a pretty good rough surrogate measure of the pressure on environment. Environmental impact is often very closely corresponding to GDP, and that's one of the very hard messages that Ross Garnaut and others are just starting to begin to dare to mention. You also notice how closely population is tied to per capita usage. Both are going up. And in Australia, population contributors perhaps 40% of the growth in GDP and environmental pressure, and per capita increase the other. The economist assumption is it can always go on upwards forever, and if it doesn't, we're in danger of crashing. That's why you have these two very incompatible viewpoints from biologists and economists. What's the next one? Limits to growth, or what supports the people need. Fairly obvious. One of them you need to notice is water. You regularly get idiots saying, let's have a national water network. We've got surplus water in Tasmania or up in the far north. We'll pipe it somewhere. Water flows downhill, doesn't it? Actually, water doesn't flow downhill, at least not with any volume, unless you've got a reasonable head of fall, as any plumber can tell you.